I never imagined my life would unravel within the serene, scholarly enclave of an Ivy League campus. Until recently, I was a proud husband, a devoted father, and an associate professor at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. My wife Rachel worked in the administration as the special assistant to the provost. We were an academic power couple on paper, respected, educated, and comfortably ensconced behind ivy-covered walls. From the outside, our life together looked idyllic. But ivy, I've learned, can strangle a structure from within. And the cracks in our facade began with the smallest of suspicions. It started with Rachel's late nights. At first, I didn't question them. An Ivy League university thrives on long hours and endless commitments. I had plenty of those myself. But when weeks passed with Rachel tiptoeing into our home well past midnight, offering only vague excuses about crisis meetings or last-minute donor events, I felt the first sting of doubt. The tone of her voice was off too glib, too rehearsed. After 8 years of marriage, I could tell when my wife was hiding something. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it down, telling myself I was being paranoid. The real trigger came one chilly October evening. I remember it was homecoming weekend. Campus was buzzing with alumni events. I expected Rachel to be swamped, so I wasn't surprised when she said she'd be working late at the office. I decided to bring her dinner, a small gesture to brighten her hectic day. Balancing a takeout bag from her favorite Thai place, I arrived at Dunham Hall, the administration building, around 8 p.m. The Gothic stone facade was mostly dark. Inside, the corridors were silent, lights low to conserve energy. I navigated to the provost's suite on the second floor, my footsteps echoing. Her office was empty. Through the glass door, I saw darkness, her desk neat, computer off. Confused, I checked my phone. No message from Rachel about a change of plans. I wandered down the hall to the provost's office suite. Maybe the meeting had moved there? The provost, Dr. Stephen Caldwell, was not only Rachel's boss, but also someone I'd come to know socially. A high-profile administrator with a booming laugh and a resume that glittered with accomplishments. Caldwell basked in the kind of influence most academics only dream of. He and I weren't close, but we'd exchanged pleasantries at faculty dinners. I never imagined that behind his genial public persona lurked the man who would help destroy my family. I gently tried the handle to the provost's reception area, locked. All the lights beyond were off. No one was working late here. A prickling heat spread across my chest. If Rachel wasn't in her office and she wasn't here with Caldwell, where was she? I set the food down on a hallway bench, my appetite gone. In that moment, the seed of suspicion sprouted into something darker. When I returned home that night, Rachel was already there. It was just past 10 p.m. when I walked through our door, empty-handed and heavy-hearted. I found her in the kitchen, freshly showered, hair damp, pouring a glass of wine. She jumped slightly at my arrival. "Oh," she said, recovering quickly. "I thought you'd be working late at the lab, Dan." Her use of my nickname was warm as ever, but I noticed she subtly slid her phone, which had been lying on the counter, face down. "I finished earlier than expected," I lied calmly. My voice betrayed nothing, but inside, my heart pounded. "I stopped by your office to surprise you with dinner, but you weren't there." Her hand froze on the wine glass. For a split second, her face went blank, like a mask dropping. Then she gave a light laugh. "Oh, that was sweet of you. I'm sorry I missed you. The meeting ran long, and then, well, Elaine from Public Relations and I decided to grab a late dinner off campus." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. "I should have called. I didn't think you'd come all the way over." There was a faint tremor in her explanation. I knew Elaine. She was a chatty PR director who loved gossip. If they'd been out together, I'd likely have heard Rachel complaining about Elaine's latest drama. But she offered no such color to the story, just a bare-bones excuse. I forced a tight smile and stepped forward to kiss her cheek. Her skin was warm, freshly scrubbed. She even smelled different, a new perfume with a musky note I didn't recognize. "No worries," I murmured, pulling back. "I was just worried when I didn't find you. Next time, just leave a text, okay?" Rachel's relief was palpable. "Of course, I'm really sorry. Today was just insane." She raised her glass. "Wine. It's a Syrah from that Napa trip we took last year." Her tone was overly cheerful now, an actress overcompensating. I declined, claiming a headache, and retreated to take a shower. Under the hot spray, I leaned my forehead against the tiles, hands balled into fists. My mind raced. She lied to me. There was no meeting. I had been at the office. Everything was dark and locked. And if by some chance she was with Elaine elsewhere, why hide it? Why not answer my calls earlier or let me know? Memories of the past few months tumbled through my head. Rachel's newfound attention to her appearance every morning. The elegant dresses, the lace lingerie I'd glimpsed in the laundry, pieces I hadn't seen her wear for me in years. Her gym sessions stretching longer, her phone always glued to her hand and guarded by a new password I didn't know. Our bedroom, once a place of playful intimacy, had grown cold. She was either conveniently exhausted or oddly distant when I reached out to touch her at night. At the time, I'd blamed stress. We were both busy juggling careers and a rambunctious 6-year-old son, Ethan. But those explanations were starting to ring hollow. The evidence was accumulating like damning footnotes to a research paper. Each detail by itself possibly innocuous, but together pointing to an unmistakable thesis: Rachel was having an affair. When I emerged from the shower, I found Rachel already asleep, or pretending to be. I stood in the doorway of our dim bedroom, watching her form rise and fall with slow breaths. In the soft glow from the hall, she looked peaceful, innocent. My chest ached. I wanted to believe that my suspicions were a terrible mistake, a concoction of my own insecurities. After all, we had built a life together. Graduate school sweethearts who married and navigated the perilous waters of academia side by side. We had laughed at the notion that an academic life could be glamorous or tempting to outsiders. Ours was a partnership of late-night grading and jointly stressing over mortgage payments. Not the stuff of soap opera scandals. But if that was true, why did I feel like an outsider in my own marriage now? Why did Rachel's phone buzz past midnight with messages she claimed were from colleagues, even on weekends? And why had I caught her in a lie about tonight? I crawled into bed carefully, maintaining distance between us. Staring at the ceiling, I made a silent promise. I would find out the truth. If my wife was betraying me, I wouldn't confront her on a mere hunch. I needed proof, cold, hard evidence like any good researcher. Only then could I decide what to do. My mind conjured the worst scenarios, and with them, surges of anger and hurt so intense I had to steady my breathing. Beside me, Rachel slept soundly, as if she hadn't a care in the world. I envied and resented her ability to do that. Over the next few days, I became a quiet observer in my own home. I noted every detail with clinical precision. The way Rachel's text notifications would make her eyes flicker with concern if I was nearby. How she'd take certain calls in another room, lowering her voice. I started checking our shared calendar against what she told me. Once, she said she was having a working lunch with the provost and a donor. When I casually asked Caldwell about the lunch in passing that week, an innocent faculty to admin chat in the corridor, he looked momentarily confused, then recovered, claiming it had gone well. I knew he was covering for her or himself or both. The choreography of their lies was clumsy. They hadn't rehearsed their alibis together. One evening, I rifled through our credit card statements and bank transactions. It wasn't hard. Rachel and I kept a joint account for household expenses. There, a charge at Le Rivage, a fancy French bistro in town. On a night I remembered eating alone with Ethan, my wife supposedly stuck in budget meetings. And another, a hotel charge at an out-of-state resort during a weekend she'd claimed to be at an executive retreat in Boston. There had been no receipt or materials from any retreat afterwards. My hands trembled as I held the printed statements. Each line item felt like a betrayal in black and white. I photocopied them quietly at my office the next day, starting a file of evidence that I'd soon guard more closely than my own research notes. I hadn't yet admitted to myself who the other man was, but in my gut I already knew. Provost Caldwell kept floating to the forefront of my mind. He and Rachel worked closely, often late, often alone, and I had seen enough small indications. A few months back at a holiday cocktail party, I remembered Caldwell laughing just a tad too warmly at one of Rachel's jokes, his hand lightly touching her back in a way that seemed familiar. Rachel had glowed under his attention, while I stood there holding our coats, feeling like a ghost. At the time, I brushed it off as my own professional envy. Caldwell was the kind of figure who could make even a confident scholar feel like a grad student again. But now it took on a more sinister cast. If it was him, if Stephen Caldwell, esteemed provost with a wife and 2 college-age daughters of his own, was sleeping with my wife, then this wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was a violation that seeped into my professional world, my community. The thought of it made my blood run hot. I pictured Caldwell presiding over faculty meetings with his trademark affability, all the while carrying on with Rachel behind closed doors. The gall, the hypocrisy, it was almost intolerable to imagine. My challenge was to confirm it without tipping them off. If they sensed my suspicions, they would simply burrow deeper underground. So I played the part of the distracted, overworked professor husband. I complained about grading and committee meetings to Rachel, trying to paint myself as too preoccupied to notice anything amiss. I let her think I believed her excuses. Meanwhile, I quietly prepared to gather evidence like a detective assembling a case. Opportunity knocked sooner than I expected. The following Friday, Rachel mentioned casually that she'd be attending a department reception until late. "Faculty from the College of Arts are coming. I need to help Stephen host it," she said while flipping through her wardrobe. I feigned mild interest, tying my tie for my own evening lecture. "No spouses, just work people, so you don't have to feel guilty not coming," she added with a quick peck on my cheek. "Can you manage dinner for Ethan tonight?" "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. I didn't mention that the College of Arts reception was something I knew about, and it would definitely include spouses. In fact, a colleague had mentioned she was taking her husband to that very event. Rachel was lying to keep me away. As I helped Ethan with his math homework that evening, my mind was elsewhere, planning. By 8 p.m., I had settled our son with my sister, under the guise of a fun sleepover at Auntie's last minute. Then I headed to campus. Dunham Hall was ablaze with lights and laughter when I arrived. The reception was in full swing in the main lounge. I peered in through the tall glass doors from a distance. Sure enough, I spotted Provost Caldwell holding court near the podium, and beside him, in a burgundy dress that I hadn't seen before, was Rachel. She looked radiant and disturbingly at ease. smiling at something Caldwell whispered in her ear as the small crowd milled about with drinks. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and something like humiliation. Here was a gathering I normally might have attended at her side, and instead I was a voyeur, my wife blatantly lying to exclude me from her double life. I didn't go in. Instead, I lurked in the shadows of a nearby hallway, cap pulled low. When the reception began winding down around 9:30, I watched Caldwell slip out a side door. Seconds later, Rachel followed, having whispered something to a colleague who nodded. My heart hammered. Was I about to witness what I dreaded? I trailed them at a careful distance through the courtyard outside. They walked briskly, side by side, not touching. Not yet. Caldwell's Mercedes was parked along the dimly lit lane behind the hall. I ducked behind a hedge as they paused by his car. Rachel glanced around. I held my breath, shrinking into darkness. Then Caldwell opened the passenger door for her. She placed a hand on his arm, leaning up. In the faint light, I saw them kiss. It was brief, almost casual, as if they'd done it 100 times. A sob of rage caught in my throat, and I clamped a hand over my mouth to remain silent. Rachel slipped into the car, and Caldwell strode around to the driver's side with a spring in his step. As the car pulled away, tears of fury and hurt blurred my vision. There it was, proof. Not courtroom evidence, not yet, but I had seen it. My wife and the provost, entwined in a lover's kiss on a dark campus lane. The image seared itself into my memory. Rachel's arms looping around his neck for that instant, his hand resting possessively on her waist. I could have confronted them right then, thrown myself in front of the car, screamed my agony into the night. But I didn't. Some cold, rational part of me held the reins, even as my body trembled. Not yet. If I blew up now, they'd deny everything. Or at best, I'd get a personal confession that left Caldwell's reputation unscathed. No, I needed more than a cathartic shout. I needed leverage. I needed a plan. I watched the red glow of the Mercedes taillights disappear beyond the iron gates of campus. Wiping my face with a sleeve, I took a shuddering breath. The autumn air was cold now, my heart colder. They would pay for this, but I would do it methodically, as befits a scholar. If Caldwell and Rachel thought they could treat me like a fool, I would show them just how calculating I could be. As I headed back to retrieve my car and pick up my son, a phrase kept repeating in my mind, a dark mantra to steel my resolve. Trust is broken, but knowledge is power. I now had knowledge of their affair, and I intended to turn that power into the most ruthless revenge imaginable. My dissertation on revenge had officially begun, and I would research and execute it with the same precision that I had applied to every scholarly endeavor in my life. Only this time, the subject of study was the destruction of my wife and her lover. I spent the weekend in a haze of controlled agitation, channeling my swirling emotions into a concrete action plan. Whenever the ache in my chest threatened to overwhelm me, when I'd see Rachel scrolling on her phone with a secretive little smile, or hear her humming in the shower, God, how could she seem so content, so normal while I was dying inside? I forced myself to focus on logistics. Anger would achieve nothing on its own. I needed to be smart. On Saturday morning, I found myself sitting at our dining table with a notepad, making a checklist like it was a grant proposal. Step 1. Copy every piece of evidence I have so far. I quietly scanned the credit card statements, showing the hotel and dinner charges, into a password-protected folder on my laptop. I saved screenshots of her frequent late-night text notifications. I'd managed to glimpse a few sender names on her phone over her shoulder. One was a disposable-sounding alias, S. Lakefield, which struck me as odd. Caldwell's first name was Stephen. Lakefield was the name of a nearby lake. Perhaps an inside reference. It reeked of a pseudonym he might use. Step 2. Document her lies in real time. I started a small ledger where I listed each lie as she told it, with date and context. October 24th. Claimed working late at office dark, empty. November 2nd. Claimed arts faculty reception was work only, seen attending with Caldwell, left together. The act of writing these down cooled my blood. It made it all real, but also impersonal, like pieces of evidence in a trial. Step 3 was more daunting. Gather new evidence, photos, messages, anything indisputable. For this, I would need to venture into the territory of spies and hackers, activities that felt utterly alien to my law-abiding, scholarly life. I started with the simplest move: a cheap digital voice recorder. On Sunday, feigning a desire to do some early holiday shopping, I took Ethan out, truly, mercifully oblivious to the storm between his parents, and stopped at an electronics store. I purchased a tiny voice-activated recorder and, in a pharmacy next door, a pay-as-you-go cell phone, something untraceable to me, for whatever contingencies might come. That night, I carefully slipped the recorder into the glove compartment of Rachel's car. If she was meeting Caldwell in secret, maybe I could catch some conversation during their drives. It was a gamble. If they met somewhere else and left her car, it'd record nothing. But at minimum, I might capture her phone calls while she was driving alone. My hands shook slightly as I wedged the slim device beneath some old insurance papers, its microphone unobstructed. I felt a pang of guilt. I was spying on my wife, violating her privacy. But then I reminded myself, her entire affair was a violation of our marriage, of our family. Compared to that, what was a little surveillance? Over the next 2 weeks, I pressed ahead with relentless determination. Rachel's routine provided ample cover for my clandestine activities. She continued her charade of extra projects and committee meetings, which often had her leaving before dawn or coming home long after Ethan's bedtime. I remained outwardly supportive and oblivious. Inside, every minute she was out on a supposed work errand, I imagined them together, perhaps meeting in his university-provided house, or in a tucked-away office or some hotel mid-afternoon. The visuals these thoughts conjured were torture. More than once, I had to lock myself in my campus office and punch the file cabinet to vent my rage silently, my knuckles bruising as badly as my heart. But I never let the mask slip at home. When she came back, I'd ask with mild interest about her day, and she'd respond with practiced answers. If anything, she grew more affectionate in those days, perhaps assuaging guilt, or perhaps out of relief that I didn't appear to suspect. She'd bring me coffee in the morning, or rest her hand on my shoulder as she passed by my desk at home. Little touches that once would have meant so much. Now they felt like acid on my skin. On a Wednesday evening, I got my first reward. Rachel had spent the afternoon at a grant proposal workshop. In reality, through a bit of discreet questioning of a colleague, I confirmed there was no such workshop scheduled. When she returned home that night, I waited until she was occupied in the shower and then retrieved the voice recorder from her car under the guise of grabbing some groceries from the trunk. With the device secure in my jacket, I hurried to my home office and plugged in headphones to review the captured audio. Mostly, I heard the mundane sounds of her car: engine revs, radio music, the whoosh of highway speed. I sped up the playback. Then, a click and a sudden halt of background noise, likely the engine turning off. Silence, some shuffling, And then voices. Rachel's, soft but clear enough in the still car, and a man's. Caldwell's deep baritone. My pulse raced as I listened. "You sure you weren't followed?" Caldwell's voice asked, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident tone. I could picture him scanning over his shoulder. "Don't be silly, Stephen," Rachel chided lightly. "Dan doesn't suspect a thing. He's buried in midterms. Besides, he trusts me." I closed my eyes at the casual use of trust. Her voice carried no guilt, only impatience. It was as if my trust was an inconvenient detail to be managed. Caldwell chuckled. All right. Come here." There was a rustling sound, and then the unmistakable wet murmur of a prolonged kiss. My grip on the headphone cord tightened until my knuckles went white. I forced myself to keep listening, jaw clenched. Their conversation resumed in hushed, intimate tones. Snippets cut through. Caldwell murmuring something about the conference next month in D.C. and how they could extend it into a private weekend. Rachel laughing softly and replying, "I'll tell Dan it's a mandatory training." More kisses. Caldwell's hand must have wandered because Rachel let out a soft gasp and teased, "Patience, not here." I yanked the headphones off, feeling physically ill. It was worse than I thought. They were planning trips, scheming more lies to my face. And she sounded so happy, so alive. When was the last time I'd heard that particular laugh of hers? The one I just heard in the recording, playful and young and free of care. Probably years, and here she was, gifting it to another man. I realized my hands were shaking. I steadied myself with a long breath and skipped ahead on the recording. I didn't need to torture myself with every moan and whisper. I'd gotten the gist. More importantly, I had evidence. A flush of vindication cut through the pain. Rachel had incriminated herself beautifully. She spoke of specific future lies, named me directly as the dupe. Any lingering denial I'd clung to evaporated. This recording was a dagger of truth. I transferred the files to my secure folder and backed it up on an encrypted thumb drive which I hid in a locked drawer of my campus office desk. I wasn't going to rely on just one copy. Paranoia was my new ally. If this blew up in my face, I needed redundancies. Emboldened by that success, I set out to gather more. Photographic evidence was next. Words can be denied, voices claimed to be out of context, but images, those are harder to explain away. I invested in a small, high-zoom camera, and swallowing my pride, even consulted a private investigator by phone for advice, using the burner phone late at night from my car. The PI's first question had been, "Do you want them caught in the act for a divorce case, or are you planning something more public?" I recall gripping the phone and answering evenly, "I want to ruin them." A pause on the line. Then the PI cleared his throat and said if I wasn't interested in keeping it quiet, I might consider just hiring a photographer for a day or two. But I wasn't ready to bring in outside witnesses physically, too risky if word got out prematurely. So I thanked him and decided to handle it myself. The next week, Caldwell and Rachel's patterns presented an opening. On Thursday, Rachel mentioned she'd be helping Provost Caldwell prepare for a Board of Trustees dinner that night, implying she'd be home late. That lie was thin as a provost's assistant. Sure, she might help with logistics, but she'd never before needed to stay after an event started. The board dinner was at 7 p.m. at a downtown hotel ballroom. If my hunch was right, she'd slip away with Caldwell either during or right after the dinner. I arranged for Ethan to sleep at his friend's house that evening, a school night sleepover excused by me telling the friend's mom that we have a family emergency. Not a lie, I thought grimly. Just not the kind she imagined. Then I parked myself in our second car, an older sedan, in the hotel's parking garage around 6:30. I wore a baseball cap low and a jacket I seldom used, feeling ridiculous and sick with adrenaline. My camera sat on the passenger seat, lens ready. I had no idea how long I'd have to wait, or if I'd even catch anything. At 8:45 p.m., my patience paid off. I spotted Caldwell's distinctive figure emerging from an elevator into the garage. Even at a distance, the provost's proud posture and silver-flecked hair were recognizable. He wasn't alone. Rachel was on his arm, her laughter echoing faintly against the concrete. They were alone in that corridor. I slid down in my seat as they walked not far from my car. Through my slightly lowered window, I caught snippets. She was chastising him for some joke he made at the dinner. He was jesting back that the trustees are too stuffy to appreciate real humor. They stopped by his black Mercedes, always the Mercedes, I thought. It was practically their chariot of sin. And then he pressed her against the driver's side door and kissed her. Not a peck, it was deep, passionate, completely inappropriate for a public setting. They truly didn't think anyone was watching. My heart thundered, but I raised the camera and snapped. The first photo, Caldwell's hand around her waist, her face upturned to his. Another, her arms encircling his neck, his lips on her throat. I felt a nauseating mix of anguish and triumph. Anguish at seeing unmistakable evidence of the woman I loved in another man's embrace. Triumph that I'd captured it. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, I ducked low as Caldwell opened her car door. She stepped in, smoothing her dress. Then he closed it, whispered something through the window that made her grin, and gently shut the door. To my surprise, Caldwell didn't get in with her. Instead, he tapped the roof of her car lightly, as if signaling her to go, and then turned back toward the elevator, perhaps to rejoin the dinner upstairs after their little rendezvous. Rachel's car started and drove off, passing within 20 feet of me. Even in the dim garage light, I could see her face through the windshield, flushed, lips red from kissing, a small, satisfied smile playing on them. I had to restrain myself from flooring my own engine and chasing her down right then for a confrontation. "Not yet, not yet," I recited under my breath. I stayed put until Caldwell disappeared back upstairs. My hands were shaking as I reviewed the photos on the camera's preview screen. They were slightly grainy in the low light, but the subjects and their behavior were clear. There was no platonic explanation for those images. I had them, indisputably. That night, I barely slept. I lay in our bed beside Rachel, who slipped in close to midnight after presumably dropping by Caldwell's house or wherever else. She had showered. I heard the water running softly in the hall bathroom, not our master bathroom notably, perhaps not wanting to wake me or perhaps washing his scent off her before slipping into our marital bed. The sheer level of deceit it took for her to do that, to come home and cleanse herself of him, and then slide under the covers next to me as if nothing happened, filled me with a white-hot rage that made me fear I'd do something reckless if I let it fester. In the dark, I listened to her breathing even out into sleep, and I promised myself we were nearing the endgame of subterfuge. Soon, I thought, she will reap what she's sown. They both will. The next day, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. I chose one from a neighboring city to avoid any gossip in our own academic community. During my lunch break, I drove an hour to a law office where no one knew me. Sitting in the polished conference room, I presented myself as a man who regrettably must dissolve his marriage. I kept my emotions on a tight leash, offering only the outline, "My wife is having an affair with a colleague. I have evidence." The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Marjorie Kane, flipped open a legal pad. "Do you have children? Assets to protect?" she asked matter-of-factly. "Yes. One child, 6 years old, and a house, joint savings, etc. I'm primarily concerned about protecting my son and ensuring I don't lose custody. And," I paused, then added, "I also want to make sure my wife faces consequences for what she's done." It was the closest I came to revealing the depth of my anger. Miss Kane pursed her lips. In this state, marital misconduct, like adultery, typically doesn't affect asset division or custody, unless it can be shown to harm the child's well-being or involve significant spending of marital funds. You mentioned evidence. Did you catch financial impropriety or anything that impacts your child? I thought of the credit card bills, dinners, and a hotel. She did use our joint account for some of their meetings, hotels, expensive meals. My voice was tightly controlled. The attorney nodded. That's something. Judges can consider it a dissipation of marital funds. It might affect how assets are divided, maybe give you a slightly larger share as compensation. She made a note. As for custody, infidelity alone usually isn't grounds to deny someone custody. The court looks at the best interest of the child, not which parent was unfaithful. However, she gave me a keen look. If her affair or behavior has negatively impacted your son, that could sway things. For instance, neglecting him to carry on the affair or exposing him to inappropriate situations. I swallowed. Ethan hadn't been directly exposed, thank God. But neglect. She's often absent, coming home late without seeing him, leaving me to handle his meals and homework almost every night, I said. He started asking why Mommy isn't around for bedtime. It's affecting him. He's quieter, withdrawn on nights she doesn't show. That last part I wasn't entirely sure of. Ethan was a resilient kid, but I needed every advantage. Perhaps he had been sad. I'd certainly felt his disappointment when Rachel missed tucking him in yet again. Miss Kane nodded. We can work with that. We could argue her priorities have not been on the child. If you have a record of her absences or any witnesses, maybe your sister or a friend who's aware she's often gone, that could help. Also, if the affair is with a colleague in a way that could cause scandal, she might not want it aired in court. That could give us leverage in negotiations. I nearly smiled at that. Oh, there will be scandal. The affair is with the provost of our university, I stated. He's a very public figure on campus. Both of them would want to avoid exposure. That raised the attorney's eyebrows. Well, that's certainly a juicy detail, not legally relevant to custody per se, but useful for leverage, as you note. She paused. We can approach this one of two ways, Mr. Porter. I had given a false last name initially to the receptionist, still paranoid, but once in the meeting, I provided my real name and details under attorney-client privilege. Either we do this quietly, use your evidence behind closed doors to get a favorable divorce settlement and custody arrangement, or we prepare for a fight, which could become very public given the parties involved. I looked her straight in the eye. I'm prepared for it to be public. In fact, I prefer it. I want them both disgraced, but I understand the need to use the evidence smartly. She studied me for a moment, perhaps reassessing the mild-mannered academic I appeared to be. In that moment, I felt as cold as I ever have. This wasn't just about dissolving a marriage. It was war. All right, she said. Then my advice, gather a bit more, if you can. The more undeniable proof, the stronger our hand, particularly any financial or parental negligence aspects. Meanwhile, do not tip your wife off. Act as normal as possible. We'll draft the divorce petition citing irreconcilable differences. No need to detail the affair in the filing, but we can have a settlement offer ready that reflects your terms. You want primary custody. You want the house, perhaps reduced or no alimony given her misconduct, and any distribution taking into account her spending on the affair. I agreed with all of that. Money was secondary to me. If anything, I'd sacrifice some money if it meant hitting her where it hurt more, her job, her reputation. But keeping the house would be good stability for Ethan, and selfishly, I didn't want to lose the home I'd worked hard for while she played around. Before I left, I handed Miss Kane a flash drive with copies of the key evidence, the photos, the damning audio clips, the financial records. She raised an impressed brow at my preparedness. This is plenty to start. Just be sure to keep originals safe. And Daniel, she added, her tone softening just a touch, take care of yourself. You're remarkably calm given the circumstances, but these things can wear on you. Calm? I suppose I was, on the surface. I had compartmentalized everything. Pain, betrayal, love, rage, tucking each feeling into its own mental box so I could function. I gave her a faint smile. Don't worry about me, I replied. I have a plan. Driving back, I felt a grim satisfaction. Step by step, I was reclaiming control. The divorce papers would be ready in a week or two, Miss Kane said, and then I could decide when to serve them. When and how, that part she left to me, understanding perhaps that I had a particular scenario in mind. Oh, I did. I absolutely did. That evening, Rachel commented on my improved mood. You seem less stressed than you've been, hun, she said as we cleaned up the dinner dishes together. She'd actually been home for once, an apparent effort to play the good wife for a night. Things going better at work? You were so swamped with grading last week. I caught the subtle probe. She was checking to see if I'd grown suspicious or if anything was amiss with me. I smiled and lied smoothly, years of academic politeness making it easy. I've managed to get on top of things, and the committee work is finally slowing down. It feels good. I gently bumped her shoulder with mine in a gesture of casual affection. Maybe we should plan a little getaway after the semester. What do you think? We've both been so busy. It was a tactical test. If she hesitated or made excuses, it might reveal something. Sure enough, Rachel's eyes darted away for a split second. Oh, that would be nice, she said, but there was strain in her voice. Maybe, after the new year? The holidays are coming up so fast, and my schedule, you know how it is. Stephen keeps me on my toes. She laughed, a brittle note. I just nodded, pretending not to notice her evasion. Inside, disgust curled. She couldn't even feign enthusiasm for a trip with me, because likely she was mentally checking it against some plan with him. Still, that night she initiated sex for the first time in months. I was shocked when, after we put Ethan to bed, she came into our bedroom wearing the silk robe I'd bought her 2 anniversaries ago. Underneath, I could tell she wore lingerie, probably part of the arsenal she'd been employing elsewhere. I stiffened, not in the way she intended, as she slid onto the bed next to me. Daniel, she murmured, running a hand over my chest. I feel like we've been distant. I'm sorry. I've just been so stressed. I miss you. Her fingers trailed down my sternum. It took everything in me not to recoil. Was this genuinely guilt, or some calculated move because she sensed a change in me? Or worse, had Caldwell perhaps suggested she keep up appearances? The thought of them strategizing about me made my stomach lurch. But I had a role to play, the unsuspecting husband. And I admit, a part of me starved for her touch all these months, responded despite my brain screaming not to. The aching loneliness, the longing for how things used to be, all of it complicated my resolve. So I let her kiss me. I let her slide that robe off and guide my hands to her body. I even closed my eyes and pretended, for one stupid, painful moment, that none of this was happening, that she was mine and I was hers and we were normal and happy. Our sex was desperate and short-lived. I can't recall the details. I wasn't truly present. Afterwards, as she lay with her head on my chest, I stared at the ceiling, feeling hollow. She fell asleep in my arms, and I lay there wide awake, anger and sadness warping together inside me. Her sudden burst of affection only solidified my plans. It was likely a goodbye of sorts. Perhaps she and Caldwell had decided that soon, after some upcoming steps, they'd drop the pretenses. Little did she know, I intended to beat them to the punch in spectacular fashion. Before dawn, I carefully extricated myself from her embrace and left the bed. I went to my home office down the hall, locked the door, and powered up my computer. There was one more category of evidence I wanted, something that could burn down Caldwell's career in particular. I knew he was a careful man professionally. He wouldn't risk using the university email for personal dalliances. But maybe, just maybe, there was something. Rachel had a university email too. If they'd been careless even once, there might be a trace. Using a bit of IT knowledge and some luck, I tried accessing Rachel's email. Months ago, she'd borrowed my laptop and saved her login to the campus webmail. She likely never imagined I'd snoop. To my amazement, the saved credentials still worked. Apparently, she hadn't changed that password in a while. I was in. My heart pounded as I combed through her inbox and sent folder, careful not to open any new messages that might mark them as unread. Most exchanges with Caldwell were dry work-related threads, scheduling meetings, attaching reports, likely deliberately sterile. But then I found an archived folder, innocuously labeled Travel Itineraries. Inside were a few emails between Rachel and Caldwell's personal Gmail, discussing arrangements for trips. They'd cleverly disguised them as group travel. One had the subject AAC Conference Itinerary enclosed, appearing like an academic conference itinerary forwarded from Caldwell. The body had flight info for 2, hotel reservations for 2, none of which explicitly named who the second person was. But I recognized the dates, the same weekend she claimed to be at a Boston retreat. They were actually booked at a resort in Vermont under Caldwell's name. Smoking gun? Not quite by itself, but damning context. I quietly forwarded those emails to a new address I created for myself, making sure to delete the evidence of forwarding from her sent mail. Then I logged out, heart racing at my boldness. If she noticed in her account logs an unfamiliar login, that could blow everything. But given her complacency, I doubted she checked such things. The final piece fell into place the next afternoon when Miss Kane notified me that the divorce papers were ready to file. I told her to hold off filing until I gave the word. I wanted to control the timing of serving Rachel. By now, 2 months had passed since the night I first confirmed the affair. 2 months of living a double life in my own way. The devoted, clueless husband on one face, and the merciless architect of revenge on the other. The strain was immense, but I managed it by visualizing the end result. Rachel and Caldwell brought to their knees. Everything they valued turned to ash. I thought of it constantly, in the quiet moments in my office, in the dead of night when insomnia gripped me, even when smiling across the dinner table at my wife as she lied about her day. I already knew I wouldn't simply hand over evidence in a courtroom. No, that was too small. I intended something far more public. Caldwell was a public figure at the university, beloved by some, respected by most. His downfall needed to be just as public as his persona. And Rachel, she prided herself on being the poised administrative professional, the supportive faculty spouse, the perfect mother in the eyes of our community. I wanted that image of hers shattered among our friends and neighbors. I wanted whispers to follow her in the faculty club and grocery store alike. My bitterness ran that deep. To that end, I planned an event of my own making. It so happened that the university's biggest end-of-semester gala, the Winter Faculty Banquet, was around the corner. A formal affair in early December, it was where faculty and administrators celebrated the year's accomplishments. Awards were given, speeches made. This year, Provost Caldwell was scheduled to give closing remarks and congratulate several distinguished professors. It would be attended by over 200 colleagues, plus the university president, trustees, and spouses. Ironically, Rachel had been the one to remind me about it weeks ago, handing me an invitation card and saying, "We should definitely go together this year. Stephen will expect us there." Perhaps she wanted the appearance of normalcy. Perhaps Caldwell's own wife would be absent. I knew Mrs. Caldwell often skipped academic functions. I had told Rachel of course we'd attend, and inwardly I knew that night would be perfect. So I set it all in motion. The banquet would be my stage. And I already had a prop in mind. A USB drive loaded with select photos and audio files, primed for a reveal. The trick would be delivering it in a way that caused maximum impact, without pointing back to me immediately, in case I needed deniability. After all, I didn't want to stand up in the banquet and scream out accusations that would descend into chaos, and he said, she said. No, I wanted their own words and actions to speak for themselves, broadcast for all to see and hear. The plan crystallized. I would anonymously tip off someone with access to the presentation equipment, maybe a tech staffer or a student volunteer working the AV. If I could slip the drive to them labeled "Play at 8:45 p.m." or something, during what I knew would be Caldwell's speech time, it could cut into the proceedings. A risky gambit. Many things could go wrong. But the sheer drama of it made my heart pound with morbid excitement. It would be a public evisceration. In academia, reputation is everything. By the end of that night, Caldwell's and Rachel's reputations would be irreparably destroyed. In the final week before the banquet, I was a man possessed, running on pure purpose. I continued to smile at my wife, share polite conversations, even teamwork in caring for Ethan, who, bless him, was delighted Mommy was home a bit more lately. I suspect she was as stressed as I was underneath, and perhaps seeing my good mood, she thought things were safe enough to ease off sneaking around. Meanwhile, I secretly coordinated with my attorney to have the divorce papers and a temporary custody request ready to file the morning after the banquet. Once evidence was out, I expected she'd be too disoriented to mount an immediate defense, and I wanted to strike while the iron was hot. I also prepared our house. I knew that when I unleashed hell, I would want Rachel out of the home to protect Ethan from immediate drama. Legally, I couldn't just kick her out without a separation agreement or court order. But I planned to make it clear she wasn't welcome. If needed, I'd stay elsewhere with Ethan for a few days. I quietly moved half of our savings into a separate account under my name alone, something the attorney advised doing before confrontation to ensure I had independent funds. I also stashed a suitcase with essentials for Ethan and me at my sister's place, under the guise of keeping some spare clothes for him here in case of sleepovers. She looked at me oddly. I'm not usually so anxious, but I insisted. I did not tell anyone about the affair or my plans. That secrecy was vital. Not even my closest friend or my sister knew. In their eyes, everything was normal. I was painfully alone in my knowledge, but that was how it had to be. Finally, the day of the banquet arrived. I dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to my last keynote conference speech. As I adjusted my tie, I met my own gaze in the mirror. I looked composed, perhaps a bit leaner, a bit harder around the eyes, but outwardly the picture of a confident academic professional. I hardly recognized the turmoil underneath that polished veneer. Rachel, looking gorgeous in a dark green evening gown, came up behind me and slipped her arms around my waist. In the mirror's reflection, we were a handsome couple. A lie. One more night, I told myself. One more night of lies, and then the truth will tear it all down. Nervous about tonight? Rachel asked, mistaking my silence for pre-event jitters. You know half the people getting awards. I'm sure you'll have fun. She reached up and adjusted my pocket square, a tender gesture that once would have made me smile. I'm okay, I replied softly. I turned and kissed her cheek. Enjoy this while you can, I thought bitterly. Part of me almost pitied her in advance for what was coming. Almost. In my jacket pocket, the USB drive rested, contained in a small, unremarkable manila envelope. On it I had written only, "For AV slides for Provost's remarks, urgent." Something generic that would hopefully prompt the tech team to plug it in at the right moment. The content I loaded? A sequence of 3 photos, the clearest of the ones I'd taken, including the garage kiss, followed by a short edited audio file of Rachel and Caldwell's incriminating conversation in the car, especially the part where she said, "Dan doesn't suspect a thing. He trusts me." And the mention of the planned weekend and lies. I chose that clip because it was both salacious and personally damning. It would leave no doubt to listeners about who was involved or what they were doing. I'd tested the file repeatedly. It was loud and clear. I felt a grim satisfaction imagining Caldwell's pompous voice boomeranging back at him in a hall full of peers. We arrived at the banquet in the university's grand ballroom, fashionably late. As we stepped into the opulent hall chandeliers, clinking glasses, a low hum of intellectual chatter, several colleagues greeted us. I exchanged pleasantries, even managed some genuine smiles, as a senior professor joked about how I'd clean up at the awards podium next year if I kept churning out publications. All the while, I subtly scanned the room for Caldwell. I spotted him soon enough, near the stage speaking with the president of the university. Caldwell's wife was indeed absent. I recalled hearing she was visiting their daughter out of state. Convenient for him, not that it would save him tonight. Rachel squeezed my arm. "I need to check on a couple of seating details," she said. As part of her admin role, she'd helped plan this event. How twisted, I thought, that she'd planned her own professional execution without knowing. She floated off to speak to the catering manager. This was my chance. The AV equipment was set up at the back, a projector feeding the big screen where a slideshow of campus highlights was currently playing, and a sound system softly streaming instrumental music. A young man in a staff polo stood there, likely a tech crew student worker. I approached, heart thudding so loudly I worried it would be heard. "Excuse me," I said in a low, urgent tone, pulling the envelope from my pocket. "I'm Professor Porter. The provost asked me to pass this to you. It's a last-minute addition for his speech. Some slides." I lied smoothly, leaning in as if in a hurry. "He said it's urgent that it be ready when he speaks." The student blinked, a bit startled. He looked around. Caldwell was across the room. And who was he to question a professor linking himself to the provost's request? "Oh, sure. We were not told, but..." Sure, I can load it up. Thank you, I breathed, handing it over. He'll be speaking around 8:45, I believe. Please make sure it's cued. And don't mention it. He wanted it to be a surprise for the audience. That last part I added with a conspiratorial smile. The student nodded dutifully and turned to his laptop to insert the drive. I didn't linger. I walked away, feeling both nauseous and electrified. It was done. The train was in motion and couldn't be stopped. I found my seat next to Rachel, who'd returned with a fresh drink. My hands felt icy, so I clasped them in my lap under the table. She misread my tension as the normal social kind. Unaware of the storm about to hit, Rachel was positively glowing that evening, chatting with our table mates about some new university initiative, joking about how the provost kept everyone on their toes. Each time she mentioned Caldwell, I reflexively stiffened, but no one noticed in the dim candlelight and lively atmosphere. Dinner courses came and went without me tasting a bite. I alternated between sweating and shivering, my nerves stretched taut. I glanced periodically towards the back. The student was still manning the equipment, no sign of alarm. Good. On stage, a series of faculty awards were being given. I applauded mechanically when expected. My eyes kept flicking to Caldwell. He was seated at the head table, laughing at a small joke with the dean of science. The epitome of a confident man at his zenith. Not for long. Finally, around 8:40, the president took the podium and gave a brief introduction. And now I'd like to invite Provost Stephen Caldwell to share a few words and our announcements for the coming year. Rachel straightened beside me, smoothing her dress. She always admired how Caldwell worked a room. I could feel the anticipation in her as she watched him ascend the steps to the lectern. I realized she had no clue what was about to happen, but a part of her must have felt some apprehension whenever he spoke publicly, given their secret. Did she worry what he might inadvertently betray? Perhaps not. They were too self-assured. Caldwell began speaking, his rich voice amplified across the hall. He started with a joke about the faculty's dedication, got some laughs, proceeded to highlight a few achievements of the semester. As he talked, I saw him occasionally glance down at the notes, or maybe the monitor that likely displayed upcoming slides. He must have expected some standard slides of data or bullet points, ones he or his staff prepared. At one point, about 5 minutes in, Caldwell hesitated just a fraction, eyes on the screen at the back of the room. Had the rogue slideshow started? I tensed. Next to me, Rachel obliviously sipped her wine, listening raptly to her lover's speech. Caldwell continued speaking, but there was a tightness to his voice creeping in. Perhaps he had seen the first photo loaded up on the projection PC and was trying to figure out what was happening. He faltered a word, then recovered, now visibly sweating under the lights. The audience likely assumed he'd lost his place momentarily. Only I and maybe one or two others attuned to him noticed the slip. Then it happened. The large screen behind Caldwell, which had been showing the generic university logo, flickered and displayed the first photograph. It took a moment for people to register what they were seeing. There, magnified 12 feet tall, was Rachel and Caldwell locked in a passionate kiss by his car. The image was slightly grainy but unmistakable. Her face, his profile, their bodies pressed together. A ripple of confusion swept through the audience. A few gasps. Some thought it a prank or a mistake, perhaps a personal photo that somehow got mixed in. Caldwell stopped speaking. He turned slowly to behold his own doom projected behind him. "What is," he began, but the tech student must have followed play it instructions well. The slideshow advanced. Another photo, Rachel at the same scene, a different angle of the embrace, Caldwell's hand clearly on her rear. An audible gasp and a titter of shock echoed. All heads swiveled toward our table, toward Rachel, and back to the stage, putting two and two together. My wife was frozen beside me, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent O of horror as she saw herself displayed. I will never forget the sound that came next. Caldwell's voice crackling over the speakers, not live but from the recording. In the sudden hush, it blared with crackling clarity. "Don't be silly, Stephen. Dan doesn't suspect a thing. He trusts me." It was Rachel's voice, tinny but recognizable. She realized with a moan of dread, an instant before the crowd did, that it was her. Then Caldwell's recorded reply followed, distorted and booming. All right, come here." The speakers then emitted the unmistakable audio of their kissing and muffled moans. Chaos. There is no other word. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Someone shrieked. I think one of Caldwell's elderly associates. A few people who hadn't clearly seen the photos now understood exactly what and who they were hearing. I saw the university president stand up, aghast, saying something to Caldwell that was lost in the noise. Caldwell, red-faced and panicked, fumbled at the podium. "Stop this! Turn that off!" he shouted, his microphone picking it up in an ear-splitting bark. The tech student, realizing something was terribly wrong, killed the audio, and the screen went black. But the damage was done. The provost stood exposed, literally, as one photo had shown his hand in a very compromising place on Rachel's body. The whispers and murmurs surged like an angry hive of bees. Rachel beside me was trembling violently. "Oh my God," she kept saying in a strangled whisper. "Oh my God, Dan." She looked at me, eyes flooded with tears of terror and shame. In that moment, amid the commotion, it was just me and her in our own bubble. My face must have been a mask of cold fury because she flinched. I leaned toward her and spoke softly, for her ears only amid the din. "I know everything, Rachel." My voice was eerily calm in my own head. "Everything." She made a choked sound, part sob, part gasp. You did this?" I didn't answer. My silence was answer enough. I stood, smooth and deliberate, and straightened my jacket. All around us, people were either standing or turned in their seats, dozens of eyes stealing glances at us while pretending not to. I caught snippets. His wife. The provost and Dr. Porter's wife. Can you believe? My heart should have been pounding out of my chest, but instead I felt a deep, icy satisfaction. This was the reckoning. On stage, Caldwell tried to regain control. He raised a hand as if commanding attention in a lecture hall. "Everyone, please," he shouted, voice cracking. "There's been a malicious incident." Ironically, he caught himself from saying more that would confirm guilt, but no explanation would suffice anyway. I watched as the president stepped to the microphone, his expression thunderous. I think we'll take a short recess," he said into the mic, trying for calm authority. "Please, everyone, remain professional." His admonition fell on deaf ears. The room was devolving into gossiping clusters. The scandal of the decade had just dropped in their laps. I turned to Rachel. She was deathly pale, makeup streaked as she'd evidently wiped tears. "Dan, we need to. I'm so sorry," she began in a desperate whisper, reaching for my arm with a shaking hand. I stepped back, out of her grasp. In a low voice, I replied, "Don't. Just don't. Not here." There must have been such cold hatred in my eyes that she blinked rapidly, fresh tears spilling. People near us were definitely watching now. Some with pity towards me, some with judgment towards her and him. I saw a dear colleague of mine, Professor Lee, looking at me with concern and sadness. He started to approach, perhaps to offer some comfort or to remove me from the spectacle. But I shook my head subtly at him, and he halted. I had one more thing to do tonight. With measured steps, I left our table and walked straight toward the stage, toward Caldwell. He saw me coming. For a split second, genuine fear flashed in his eyes. Perhaps he thought I'd attack him physically, and a part of me wanted to, oh yes, but I had other ideas. As I reached him, the crowd's murmurs hushed slightly, anticipating confrontation. Caldwell held up a placating hand. "Daniel, he started, his public mask completely off now, replaced by a sweaty, fearful man. I didn't let him finish. I stepped up close, and in a voice loud enough to carry to the first few tables, knowing well it'd be reported further by morning, I said clearly, "You despicable son of a bitch. Consider your career here finished." His face contorted with a mix of anger and panic. "Now see here," he sputtered, still grasping at his authority. He even reached out as if to grip my shoulder in a false show of man-to-man appeal. I sidestepped his touch. "Don't you dare," I hissed, just for him. Then louder, enunciating each word so all could hear. "My wife, you preyed upon my wife under the guise of mentorship and friendship. In my own home, around my child." My voice shook then, genuine emotion flooding in, but I harnessed it. "You betrayed every code of decency and integrity. You are unworthy of your position, and by God, I will see you answer for this." A collective, "Oh!" emanated from the listeners at my open accusation. Caldwell's face had gone from red to ashen. I, he stuttered, finding nothing to say that could matter. I stepped back and surveyed him one last time. This towering figure who had seemed so formidable now looked pitiful, mouth opening and closing without sound, eyes darting to see the judgment all around. The president was approaching us, flanked by a couple of security personnel who normally just stood at the doors. Likely they intended to usher Caldwell away for damage control. I didn't need to stay. In fact, it was best I didn't. My part was done. I turned on my heel and walked off the stage, through the stunned audience and out of the ballroom doors. As I left, I heard Rachel calling after me, voice high with desperation. Dan, please!" I didn't break stride. Behind me, a cacophony of voices erupted anew. I exited into the cold winter night air, my lungs burning. I hadn't realized I was breathing so hard. Each exhale clouded in front of me. I fumbled for my phone and dialed my sister. When she picked up, I kept it simple. "Can I pick up Ethan now?" "No, nothing's wrong with him." "Yes, I'm okay. I'll explain later. Please, I need him with me tonight." She must have heard something in my voice because she just said, "Okay, come over." I got to my car and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel. They were shaking badly now, adrenaline waning. I closed my eyes. It was done. 8 years of marriage destroyed in a 5-minute spectacle. There would be no going back from this for any of us. And in that moment, I felt a profound sadness mixing with relief. It struck me that I was now truly alone, as a chapter of my life ended in public flames. But I also felt a grim sense of justice served. They had gotten what they deserved. When I arrived at my sister's to fetch Ethan, I composed myself. I put on a smile and hugged my boy tightly, perhaps a bit too tightly, as he squirmed and giggled, complaining I was squishing him. On the drive home, he chattered about the games he and his cousins played, oblivious to the seismic shift that had happened. Back at our house, I put him to bed, in my room, letting him snuggle up where I could see him, protect him. He asked, half asleep, "Is Mommy home yet?" I stroked his hair and murmured, "Not yet, bud. She's away for a little while." He was too drowsy to question it. As I watched him drift off, innocence on his round face, I felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. This, at least, remained pure and good in my life. Whatever else I lost, I had my son. It was nearly midnight when I finally heard the front door open quietly. I was sitting in the living room, lights off, a single table lamp illuminating the divorce papers I had retrieved from my briefcase. I intended to hand them to her tonight, a final nail in the coffin. Rachel stepped inside, still in her gown, looking utterly broken, makeup ruined, hair disheveled, her shoulders stooped as if under a great weight. She saw me and stopped, hovering by the door like a guilty trespasser. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Where is he? Where's Ethan?" I nodded toward the bedroom. "Sleeping. He doesn't know anything." She let out a breath, as if she'd been afraid I told him, which in hindsight, of course I wouldn't. She shut the door gently and took a few steps toward me. In the dim light, I could see fresh tears glinting. "Dan, her voice cracked. "I am so sorry. I know that doesn't begin to—" I held up my hand. "Stop." The word came out more sharply than I intended. I stood up, feeling an exhaustion deeper than any I'd known. "Sorry? Now? After what I heard, what I saw, for months. You're sorry because you got caught, Rachel. That's all." My tone was flat, devoid of the rage that had earlier fueled me. Now there was just emptiness and disgust. She shook her head frantically. "No, I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I ruined everything. I never meant for it to go so far. It was a mistake, a mistake?" I laughed hollowly. "A mistake is one night of stupidity. You carried on an entire affair. In our bed? Did he—" I stopped myself, clenching fists. I didn't want to know the graphic details. The images already in my mind were torture enough. She sobbed, covering her face with shaking hands. "It was never about hurting you. I was selfish and foolish. I got swept up. In his power? His prestige?" I spat. "I heard your little confession on that video. I know exactly why, Rachel. Because he offered you a taste of the bigger life you thought I couldn't give you. Movers and shakers, wasn't it? That's what you wanted to be around. Not pathetic old me in my dusty lab." She dropped her hands, eyes wide. How?" "Oh yes," I answered the unfinished question. "I heard everything in his office. Your whole sick justification. How you were admiring his ambition. How being with me was being stuck in a small life." My voice trembled, despite trying to keep cool. Those words still cut deep. I was recalling nearly verbatim what Sylvia in the original story said. But in our context, it's Rachel's sentiments we've implied. For continuity, I'd make it fit, Rachel. How did we get here? You saw a way out of what we had. Rachel looked stricken, guilt flooding her features. "Dan, that wasn't—" I was angry and trying to justify. "Don't," I broke in quietly. "Don't lie to me anymore. You meant it. Maybe not once, but eventually you did. You decided I wasn't enough for you. Our family wasn't enough. You wanted his world. Well, now you'll have none of it." She crumpled onto the sofa, burying her face in her palms. Between hitching breaths, she pleaded, "Please, I'll do anything to fix this. I'll quit my job. I'll cut him off completely. We can move away, start over." "Start over?" I echoed, almost marveling at her audacity. "Rachel, there is no starting over. There is no coming back. Tonight was the final chapter." I picked up the sheaf of documents on the table and placed them in front of her. "This is a divorce petition. I'll be filing it first thing tomorrow morning. No, in a few hours, actually. She stared at the papers as if they were a snake. Dan, no, please, she whispered. Don't do this. Think of Ethan. Think of what this will do to him. My jaw tightened. I am thinking of him. He deserves at least one parent who isn't a liar and a cheat. One stable home. I intend to give him that. At this, Rachel dropped to her knees on the carpet, clasping her hands together as if in prayer, looking up at me in abject desperation. I'd never seen her like this. My proud, confident wife reduced to begging. It was a pathetic sight, and it twisted something in me, but I steeled myself. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you, to him. I swear, she cried. Don't take our family away. I know I was wrong. I know I destroyed your trust. But please, I love you. I do love you, Dan. It was never that I didn't love you. Love, I snapped, my voice echoing. I quickly glanced toward the bedroom. No sound from Ethan. Lucky he slept like a rock. I lowered my tone, but with no less intensity. You don't do what you did to someone you love. You don't risk your child's happy home for love of your husband. That isn't love, Rachel. I don't know what twisted need it was, thrill, ambition, whatever. But love it wasn't. She was shaking her head violently, crawling a step forward to grab the hem of my jacket. No, I do love you, please. I was stupid, and I fell for his. I thought it was just infatuation at first. I never planned to leave you, She stopped, realizing perhaps that none of this absolved her. It sounded even worse. She wouldn't leave me, but she'd happily carry on with him and keep me in the dark. I gently pried her fingers off my jacket. I think you should leave now, I said quietly. Her eyes flared in fresh panic. Leave? But where will I mean, this is my home too. Not tonight, I said, stepping back. I can't look at you right now. Go to a friend's, a hotel. I almost laughed darkly at that. She was well acquainted with hotels. I don't care, but I don't want you here when Ethan wakes up. I'll tell him you had to go on a work trip for a few days until we figure out how to explain all this to him. My throat tightened at the thought of that conversation down the line. She sat back on her heels, staring at me in disbelief. You're kicking me out? She whispered. I met her gaze steadily. Yes, for now I am. And if you don't go willingly, I will go with Ethan and not tell you where. Your presence here, after what happened, will do more harm than good for him right now. And frankly, I can't stand to share a roof with you. I was firm, but strangely calm. The tempest of emotions had spent itself. Now there was just cold resolution. Rachel swallowed and nodded, a hollow, defeated motion. She knew she had no leverage. Not tonight. Perhaps she thought legally she could fight to stay, but she also knew any confrontation might wake our son and traumatize him. She wouldn't risk that, to her credit. Slowly, she stood. I'll go, she murmured, but I'll be back in the morning to see Ethan off to school. He deserves that. I can pretend everything's normal for him. I considered it. Allowing that charade for Ethan's sake might be kind, but I was wary. I finally said, I'll let you know in the morning if that's acceptable. I need to see how he is, if he asks for you. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. He will. He always asks for me. She said it with guilt, knowing how often she hadn't been there for him of late. We stood in silence for a moment, two estranged partners in the dim glow of a lamp, the gulf between us unbridgeable. Finally, Rachel wiped her face, squared her shoulders a bit, and asked in a trembling voice, Where do you want me to go? Is there anything? I don't care where you go, I replied, exhaustion creeping in. Maybe to your lover? Oh, wait. He's likely lost his house keys tonight when campus security escorted him out. I couldn't resist the jab. It landed. She winced. He was put on leave pending an investigation, she said softly, eyes down. The president met with us after you left. I'm on leave too. She almost choked on that. The humiliation fresh. I simply said, good. And I meant it. Let the university deal with them both accordingly. Rachel hovered, as if hoping for some gesture from me. Maybe that I'd soften, or maybe that I'd utter some parting insult she could absorb. I gave her nothing more. I walked to the front door and opened it, gesturing for her to go. She gathered her purse and coat shakily. As she passed me, she paused, her lips trembling like she wanted to say something meaningful. But in the end, all she could manage was a broken, "I'm so sorry, Daniel," before stepping out into the cold. I closed the door behind her and locked it. When she was gone, I pressed my forehead to the door and let out a long, shuddering sigh. There it was, the sound of a heart breaking, perhaps, though I'm not sure if it was mine or hers or both. I had won. I had orchestrated a flawless revenge. Rachel and Caldwell were disgraced, likely jobless by morning, their social circles in tatters. My wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, left our home in tears and shame. The mighty provost, I had heard, was already facing the consequences, probably a suspension at minimum, and given the public nature, probably a resignation or firing to appease the board. Their affair would be the scandal of the decade here. Every whisper on campus would carry their names for months, maybe years. They'd never escape it professionally. By all rights, I should have felt triumphant. And a part of me did, in a cold, intellectual way. The same part that meticulously planned each step and now checked them off a list. But as I pushed off the door and wandered back to the living room, surveying the detritus of those divorce papers and the emptiness of the house, I found that my eyes were wet. And suddenly, I was shaking, despite the warmth of the heater kicking on. I sank down onto the couch, the same couch where we used to cuddle and watch movies after Ethan went to bed, where Rachel would lay her head in my lap, and I'd stroke her hair. A phantom of those happier times seemed to cling to the cushions, and I cried. I buried my face in my hands, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I let myself mourn. I mourned the love I thought I had, the marriage I built my life around, the family that would never be the same. I mourned the man I used to be, trusting, optimistic, maybe a bit naive. He was gone too. I had become someone else to survive this, someone harder and more ruthless. It was necessary, I knew, but it wasn't without cost. After a few minutes, I wiped my tears, head throbbing. I had to pull myself together. I wasn't finished with responsibilities. In the quiet of the night, I tidied up the living room, put the divorce papers away, and then crept into the bedroom where my son slept. I curled up on top of the covers next to him, drawing comfort from the steady rhythm of his breathing. Staring at the ceiling, I reflected on what lay ahead. Closure was a word that came to mind. Had I achieved it? In terms of revenge, yes, the culprits were punished. There would be legal battles, likely, custody, settlement. But with the evidence and fallout, I had the upper hand. Miss Kane had called me earlier, actually. Having heard the grapevine already, news travels fast. She assured me that given what happened, Rachel would likely concede to my terms to avoid an even uglier fight. I suspected she was right. Rachel had little will left to battle me, not after tonight. I glanced at Ethan, gently brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. For him, I had to remain strong and steady in the coming weeks. He'd need as much normalcy and love as possible. Perhaps, I thought, this was the better path forward I was promised myself, focusing on being the best father I could be, building a life for us unmarred by deceit. As for my own path, I didn't know if happiness or new love awaited down the line. In that moment, I didn't particularly care. The wounds were too fresh, but I felt an unexpected sense of peace amidst the heartbreak. I had faced the worst, and I survived. More than that, I took command when I felt powerless and delivered justice on my own terms. Eventually, my eyes grew heavy, the adrenaline completely gone. I fell asleep beside my son, lulled by his warmth and the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, the worst was behind me. In the weeks that followed, the predictions held true. Provost Caldwell resigned in disgrace before the university could formally fire him. An emergency statement from the board cited unethical conduct and promised a thorough review of administrative oversight. I heard he left town shortly after, his wife filing for divorce swiftly. I anonymously mailed her a select few pieces of evidence, a courtesy, or perhaps one last twist of the knife. Rumor had it he took a low-profile consulting job somewhere far away. His bright star had imploded. Rachel, for her part, formally quit her position at the university. We went through the motions of the divorce settlement with surprisingly little fight. It was as if all the resistance in her had been broken. She agreed to give me primary custody of Ethan, at least for the school weeks, with her having alternate weekends and some holidays. Financially, we split things fairly. I didn't gouge her. I had no interest in prolonging contact through alimony battles. The house went to me. She didn't contest it. Perhaps she felt she didn't deserve it, or perhaps living there with the memories would be too much for her anyway. One afternoon, during a quiet moment in the legal proceedings, as we sat in a conference room waiting for our lawyers to hash out some detail, Rachel looked at me with hollow eyes and whispered, "You were right. About everything." I didn't ask for clarification. She continued, "I destroyed us, and it's my cross to bear. I just want you to know, I'll never forgive myself. I don't expect you to either." I said nothing. There was really nothing to say. It was just sad. We signed the papers a week later, and that was that. 8 years of marriage reduced to signatures and stamped copies. Our families and friends eventually learned some version of the story. Most pieced it together from the campus scandal, which couldn't be kept entirely quiet. There was embarrassment on both sides, but also a strange outpouring of support for me, especially from my colleagues. Some who had been more acquaintances than friends suddenly came by to check on how I was doing, to invite me out for beers, to encourage me that I'd get through this. I appreciated it, though a part of me remained guarded, cautious about trusting again. As for Rachel, she moved into a small apartment across town. When Ethan first visited her there, he came home confused and a bit withdrawn. That night, I carefully sat him down and, in a gentle way, explained that Mommy and Daddy were going to live in different homes and not be married anymore. It broke my heart to see his lip quiver. He asked if it was because he did something wrong. I hugged him fiercely and assured him it was absolutely not his fault, that we both loved him so much, and that would never change. People make mistakes, I said, and sometimes even grown-ups can't fix them. It was the most diplomatic explanation I could muster. He cried a little, and I held him, swallowing my own tears until he fell asleep in my arms. Co-parenting with Rachel in the aftermath was challenging but civil. She was unfailingly cooperative with schedules, almost to the point of being painfully formal. With Ethan, she was attentive and gentle, likely overcompensating for her guilt. I let her have more time than the agreement strictly allowed when she requested it. Whatever happened between us, I refused to use our child as a pawn in vengeance. My fight was never with him, and I wanted him to have his mother in his life, even if my relationship with her was irreparably severed. Healing is not linear, but as spring arrived, I found that the anger within me had cooled from a raging fire to a few low embers. There were even days I didn't think about the betrayal at all, consumed instead with a new research project, or simply helping Ethan ride his bike without training wheels. Life, oddly and wonderfully, goes on. One Saturday, I took Ethan to the park. I recall sitting on a bench, watching him run with other kids, his laughter ringing out. The sun was warm on my face. I realized I was smiling, a genuine, unforced smile. In that moment, I understood that I was going to be okay. Scarred, yes. Different, certainly. But okay. The closure I sought didn't come with a dramatic bang or some declaration of victory. It came quietly, like a tired soul finally feeling the dawn after a long night. I still have dark moments. Trust is something I may always struggle with. And when I see Rachel during handoffs of our son, there's a sadness in us both for what could have been. But there's also a resignation and perhaps the faintest hint of mutual understanding. We created something good in our child, even if we destroyed each other in the process. In that, there's a sliver of grace. As for revenge, was it worth it? People have asked me, those few who know the whole truth, if I'd do it again. My answer, yes. Maybe that marks me as cruel to some, but those who have felt the kind of betrayal I did might understand. I didn't act out of pure malice. I acted to reclaim my dignity, to ensure that those who wronged me faced consequences. And perhaps I also acted out of a shattered heart that needed some sense of justice to even begin to heal. Caldwell and Rachel set fire to my life. I simply chose not to go down in the flames quietly. Instead, I became the controlled burn that took them down with me. The landscape of my life is altered, but from the ashes, I am building something new, something my son and I can live with honestly. One of the last things Rachel said to me, in a letter she sent months later, was, "I hope someday you find it in you to let go of the anger and remember the love that was once there. You were a good husband, and you are a good father." I'm sorry I lost sight of that. I haven't responded. I'm not sure I ever will. But I have let go of most of the anger. It doesn't consume me any longer. Do I remember the love that was once there? Yes, I do, sometimes with a wistful pang. But I also remember the pain, and that keeps me resolute in moving forward, not back. On my desk at home now sits two things: a photograph of me and Ethan at the beach last summer, both of us grinning ear to ear as we hold up a sloppy sandcastle, and next to it, a single sheet of paper in a frame. On that paper is a quote I found in a bookstore one day that resonated deeply. What a privilege it is to emerge from the storm. I keep it as a reminder that I went through hell, a storm of lies, betrayal, and vengeance, and I came out the other side. Not unscathed, but still standing. And here I stand, a bit wiser, a bit warier, but looking toward tomorrow. The ivy-covered halls of the university still rise each morning, golden in the sun, unchanged by the small human dramas that unfolded within. Life continues in its cycles, Students study, professors teach, seasons turn. As for me, I carry on with my own life's work, raising my son with love and honesty, pursuing knowledge in my field with renewed focus, and perhaps, just maybe, staying open to the idea that not all futures must be dark. The path ahead is mine to forge, and I intend to walk it with my head high, knowing that I survived one of the most devastating experiences a person can endure and found my way through. In the end, the husband won, but more importantly, the husband endured, learned, and grew. And that, I've come to realize, is a victory in its own right.